It was just a photo of a birthday party, but look closely at the child in the corner. Dr. Rebecca Torres adjusted her desk lamp and leaned closer to her computer monitor, her coffee growing cold beside a stack of archival folders. It was a typical Wednesday morning at the Louisiana Heritage Museum in New Orleans, and she was working through the latest donation, a collection of early 20th century photographs from the estate of Catherine Duchamp, who had passed away at 97 the previous month. Rebecca had been the museum's lead photograph curator for 8 years, specializing in the social history of New Orleans between 1890 and 1920. She had examined thousands of historical images, each one a window into the past, revealing stories of families, celebrations, tragedies, and the complex racial dynamics that had shaped the city. This particular collection consisted of 43 photographs, most showing the Duchamp family at various social events, garden parties, holiday gatherings, formal portraits. The Duchamp had been prominent sugar plantation owners, their wealth built on the backs of enslaved people before the Civil War, and maintained through exploitative labor practices well into the 20th century. Rebecca carefully placed each photograph on her high-resolution scanner, creating digital archives that would preserve these images long after the fragile originals deteriorated. The process was methodical, almost meditative. She documented each image's dimensions, estimated date, subjects when identifiable, and any notable features. The 23rd photograph in the collection showed a children's birthday party. Rebecca scanned it without much initial interest. Birthday parties were common subjects in family photograph collections. The image showed approximately 15 children arranged in the formal garden of what appeared to be the Duchamp mansion on Prytania Street. Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees in the background. Elaborate decorations, paper lanterns, ribbon-festooned tables, floral arrangements suggested a celebration of some significance. The children wore their finest clothes. Girls in white lace dresses with enormous bows in their hair. Boys in dark suits with stiff collars and bow ties. In the center stood a girl of about 10, wearing a particularly elaborate dress and holding what appeared to be a doll. The birthday girl, Rebecca assumed. Most of the children smiled or maintained the serious expressions common in photographs of that era, when holding still for several seconds was necessary for proper exposure. A few looked slightly blurred, evidence of fidgeting during the exposure time. Rebecca was about to move on to the next photograph when something caught her eye. In the left corner of the image, partially obscured by an ornamental magnolia tree, stood another child. She zoomed in on that section of the digital scan. A boy, perhaps 8 years old, dressed as formally as the other children in a dark suit and bow tie. But his expression was completely different from every other face in the photograph. While the other children smiled or maintained neutral expressions, this boy's face showed unmistakable terror. His mouth was open, his eyes wide and fixed on something beyond the frame's edge. His body was turned slightly away from the camera, 1 foot forward as if he had been captured mid-motion, about to run. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. She increased the magnification to 400%, studying the boy's face more closely. This wasn't a child making a funny expression or caught in an awkward moment. This was genuine fear. She also noticed something else. The boy's skin was darker than the other children's. In the black and white photograph, the contrast was clear. He was black, the only non-white child in the image. Rebecca sat back, her mind racing. New Orleans in the early 1900s had been deeply segregated. The idea of a black child attending a wealthy white family's birthday party was extraordinary, and the boy's formal attire suggested he wasn't there as a servant. She checked the back of the original photograph. In faded ink, someone had written, "Eleanor's 10th birthday, March 15th, 1911. Rebecca immediately opened the museum's genealogical database and searched for Eleanor Duchamp. The results appeared quickly. Eleanor Duchamp, born March 15th, 1901, died October 1989, daughter of Charles and Vivienne Duchamp, sister to younger brother Henry Duchamp, born 1907. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard, searching New Orleans newspaper archives from March 1911. She narrowed the search to Duchamp and March. The headline appeared on the third page of results from the Times-Picayune, dated March 16th, 1911. Tragic accident at garden party. Young boy drowns at Duchamp estate. Rebecca's breath caught. She clicked the article and began to read. The article was brief, occupying only a few column inches on page 7 of the Times-Picayune, tucked between advertisements for patent medicines and notices of steamship departures. Rebecca read it 3 times, taking notes. A tragic incident marred festivities at the Prytania Street residence of Mr. Charles Duchamp yesterday afternoon. During a birthday celebration for his daughter Eleanor, a young Negro boy employed by the household drowned in the ornamental lake on the property. The boy, identified as Robert Beaumont, age 8, son of the Duchamp family cook, apparently fell into the water while playing near the lake's edge. By the time adults reached him, he had succumbed. The coroner ruled the death an accidental drowning. Mr. Duchamp expressed regret over the unfortunate incident. Rebecca read the words again, her historian's mind immediately catching the discrepancies and evasions. Employed by the household, an 8-year-old boy, while playing near the lake's edge. Why would a servant's child be playing during a formal party? And most significantly, The article made no mention of the boy being dressed formally or attending the party as a guest. She pulled up the photograph again, zooming in on Robert's face. That expression of terror. He wasn't playing. He had seen something. Something that happened right before or during the moment this photograph was taken. Rebecca checked the timestamp on the photograph's metadata from the scan. The original had been printed on paper stock, consistent with March 1911. The party and the drowning had occurred on the same day. She needed more information. Rebecca opened the city's death certificate database, searching for Robert Beaumont, died March 15, 1911. The record appeared, stark and clinical. Name, Robert Beaumont. Race, colored. Age, 8 years. Date of death, March 15, 1911. Cause of death, drowning. Location, private residence, 2847 Prytania Street. Informant, Charles Duchamp. Disposition, buried. March 17, 1911, Lafayette Cemetery, No. 2. Lafayette Cemetery No. 2 was historically a burial ground for New Orleans' black community. Rebecca made a note to visit it later. She searched for any other newspaper coverage of the incident. Most mentions were identical to the Times Picayune article, suggesting they had simply reprinted the same brief report. But on March 18th, she found a different piece in a smaller publication called the New Orleans Lantern, a progressive newspaper that occasionally covered stories ignored by mainstream press. Questions remain about Duchamp drowning. The article was longer, more detailed, and far more skeptical of the official account. The death of young Robert Beaumont at the Duchamp estate this past Thursday raises troubling questions that the coroner's hasty ruling of accidental drowning fails to address. Multiple sources report that the boy was not employed by the household, as initially stated, but was the son of Mary Beaumont, the family's longtime cook. Furthermore, witnesses claim young Robert was dressed in formal attire and appeared to be attending the birthday celebration as a guest, a highly unusual circumstance that the Duchamp family has declined to explain. Most significantly, several children present at the party claim Robert was attempting to rescue another child who had fallen into the water, specifically 4-year-old Henry Duchamp, younger brother of the birthday girl. These children state that Robert succeeded in pushing young Henry to the edge of the lake, where adults pulled him to safety, but that Robert himself was unable to escape the water. If these accounts are accurate, Robert Beaumont died a hero, sacrificing his own life to save the son of his mother's employer, yet no such acknowledgement appears in the official record, and the Duchamp family has refused requests for comment. The boy was buried quietly 2 days later, with only his mother and a handful of mourners present, no recognition of his bravery, no public memorial, no explanation of why a Negro child was attending a white family's party in formal dress. The New Orleans Lantern calls upon the Duchamp family to provide a full and honest account of the events of March 15th, and to properly honor the memory of a young boy who, by all accounts, save the official one, died saving another child's life. Rebecca sat back, stunned. The photograph suddenly made complete sense. Robert hadn't been playing. He had seen Henry Duchamp falling into the lake. That expression of terror was the moment of recognition, the instant before he ran to save the younger boy's life. And he had been at the party as a guest, dressed formally like the other children, which meant something even more extraordinary. Robert had somehow been friends with Eleanor Duchamp, close enough that she had invited him to her 10th birthday party in a city and era where such friendships were not just unusual but virtually unthinkable. Rebecca needed to understand more about Robert, about Eleanor, and about the circumstances that had led to this moment captured in the photograph, a moment that would end with a child's death and a century of silence. Rebecca spent the next 2 days searching for information about Robert Beaumont and his mother Mary. Census records from 1910 showed Mary Beaumont, age 32, listed as cook in the Duchamp household, living in servants' quarters on the property. Under her name was listed one child, Robert, age 7. No father was mentioned, and further searches revealed no marriage record for Mary Beaumont. Robert had been born out of wedlock, which carried significant social stigma in 1903, particularly for a black woman working in a white household. Rebecca found employment records in the Duchamp family papers, also part of Catherine's donation. Mary Beaumont had begun working for the family in 1899, 2 years before Eleanor's birth. A notation in Charles Duchamp's personal ledger indicated Mary had been hired on the recommendation of Vivienne Duchamp, Eleanor's mother, who had known Mary from childhood. This detail caught Rebecca's attention. She dug deeper into Vivienne's background. Born Vivienne Marchand in 1878, she had grown up in the French Quarter, daughter of a modestly successful shipping clerk. Before marrying Charles Duchamp in 1900, Vivienne had lived an ordinary middle-class life, certainly not in the same social sphere as the wealthy Duchamp family. Rebecca found a city directory from 1895 listing the Marchand family residence on Dauphine Street. Just 2 houses down, another entry showed the Beaumont family, Thomas Beaumont, a dock worker, his wife Alice, and their daughter Mary, age 17. The pieces began to connect. Vivienne and Mary had been neighbors growing up, possibly friends. When Vivienne married into the wealthy Duchamp family, she had brought Mary with her as a trusted cook. And when Mary's son Robert was born in 1903, he had grown up in the same household as Eleanor, born in 1901. The two children would have been playmates in their earliest years before the rigid social rules of segregated New Orleans would have forced them apart. Except, somehow, they hadn't been forced apart. At least not entirely. Rebecca found more evidence in the Duchamp family papers. Viviane's personal correspondence, preserved in a small wooden box, contained several letters from 1909 and 1910. One letter, from Vivienne to her sister Marguerite, mentioned the children. Eleanor continues to be a spirited child, much given to willful behavior that Charles finds alternately amusing and exasperating. She has formed a close attachment to Mary's boy Robert, who is clever and kind. They spend hours in the garden inventing elaborate games. Charles disapproves, of course, saying it's inappropriate, but I see no harm in it. They are children, and childhood friendships are innocent, whatever society's rules might demand. I remember my own friendship with Mary at that age, before the world insisted we were too different to be friends. Another letter, dated February 1911, just a month before the birthday party, revealed more. Eleanor has been pestering me about her birthday celebration. She wants Robert invited as a proper guest, not hidden away in the kitchen. Charles is furious at the suggestion, but Eleanor can be remarkably persistent when she sets her mind to something. She says Robert is her best friend, and that it would be cruel to exclude him from her party. I find myself agreeing with her, though I know what scandal it might cause. Sometimes I think my daughter sees the world more clearly than any of us. Rebecca felt tears prickling her eyes. Eleanor had fought to have Robert at her party. She had insisted on it, despite knowing it would be controversial. And somehow she had won. Robert had attended, dressed formally, welcomed as a guest, and then he had died saving Eleanor's younger brother. Rebecca needed to find out what had happened to Eleanor afterward. She searched death records and found Eleanor's obituary from October 1989 in the Times-Picayune. Eleanor Duchamp Morrison, age 88, passed away peacefully at her home in the Garden District on October 12th. Born in New Orleans to Charles and Vivienne Duchamp, she was educated at the Newcomb College and devoted her life to social causes. She was an early supporter of civil rights initiatives in Louisiana and worked tirelessly with the Urban League and the NAACP throughout the 1950s and 1960s. She is survived by her daughter Catherine Morrison, 3 grandchildren, and numerous nieces and nephews. Memorial donations may be made to the Robert Beaumont Scholarship Fund at Xavier University. The Robert Beaumont Scholarship Fund. Eleanor had created a scholarship in Robert's name. After all those years, 78 years after his death, she had ensured his name would be remembered and honored. Rebecca immediately contacted Xavier University's development office, asking about the scholarship. The coordinator sent her the fund's documentation. Eleanor had established it in 1969, providing generous endowment that funded full scholarships for promising black students studying education or social work. The fund's mission statement, written by Eleanor herself, was included in the documentation. In memory of Robert Beaumont, who died at age 8, performing an act of extraordinary courage and selflessness. His brief life embodied the best of human nature, transcending the artificial barriers that society erects between. This scholarship honors his memory and supports young people who, like Robert, possess both moral courage and compassionate hearts. Rebecca printed the document and placed it beside the photograph of the birthday party. Eleanor had spent her entire adult life working for civil rights and had created a lasting tribute to her childhood friend. But the full story of Robert's heroism and the friendship that had led to his presence at that party had remained buried, known only to Eleanor and perhaps a few others. Until now, Rebecca knew she needed official documentation of what had happened that day. She contacted the Louisiana State Archives, requesting any records related to the coroner's inquest into Robert Beaumont's death. 3 days later, she received a scanned file containing the complete inquest documentation. The official proceedings had been brief, almost perfunctory. The coroner, Dr. James Sullivan, had taken testimony from only 4 witnesses: Charles Duchamp, his wife Vivienne, a groundskeeper named Thomas Walsh, and Eleanor herself, who had been questioned despite being only 10 years old. Charles Duchamp's testimony was short and carefully worded. The children were playing in the garden during my daughter's birthday celebration. I was inside with other adult guests. I heard screaming and ran outside to find several children gathered at the ornamental lake. The Beaumont boy was in the water. My groundskeeper and I pulled him out, but he was already deceased. It appeared he had fallen in and been unable to swim to safety. A tragic accident. Vivienne Duchamp's testimony echoed her husband's. I was not present when the incident occurred. By the time I reached the lake, Robert had already been pulled from the water. It was a terrible tragedy. The boy had been playing near the lake despite warnings to stay away from it. Thomas Walsh, the groundskeeper, provided slightly more detail. I heard children screaming and ran toward the lake. I saw the Beaumont boy in the water, near the center where it's deepest. Mr. Duchamp and I went in after him and pulled him out, but he wasn't breathing. We tried to revive him but couldn't. I didn't see how he ended up in the water. The children were supposed to be playing away from the lake. Then came Eleanor's testimony, and Rebecca's hands trembled as she read it. My name is Eleanor Duchamp. I'm 10 years old. Robert was my friend. He came to my birthday party. We were taking a photograph when Henry wandered away from the group. I didn't see where he went. Then I heard Robert yell. He ran past me toward the lake. I turned and saw Henry in the water. He had fallen in. Robert jumped in and pushed Henry toward the edge. Mr. Walsh pulled Henry out, but Robert went under. He didn't come back up. Robert saved Henry. Robert saved my brother. The coroner had written a note beside Eleanor's testimony. Child appears distressed and confused. Account differs from adult witnesses. Conclusion: accidental drowning due to victim's inability to swim. Rebecca felt anger rising in her chest. Eleanor had told the truth. She had clearly described Robert seeing Henry fall in, jumping in to save him, and succeeding before drowning himself. But the coroner had dismissed her account as the confused testimony of a distressed child, accepting instead the vague statements of adults who hadn't actually witnessed what happened. More tellingly, neither Charles nor Vivian had mentioned Henry falling into the water at all. They had portrayed Robert's drowning as a simple accident, a boy playing too close to the water who fell in. They had erased both Henry's danger and Robert's heroism from the official record. Rebecca found one more document in the file. A handwritten note from Dr. Sullivan to Charles Duchamp, dated March 16, 1911, the day after the inquest. Mr. Duchamp, per our discussion, I have concluded the inquest and ruled the death accidental. The matter is closed. I trust this resolution will prevent any further scrutiny or scandal regarding the circumstances of your daughter's party. The presence of a Negro child as a guest, while unusual, need not become public knowledge. I have instructed the clerk to minimize details in the official record. The coroner had actively collaborated with Charles Duchamp to cover up what had really happened. The goal was clear: prevent scandal, protect the family's reputation, and erase any suggestion that a black child had been welcomed as an equal at a white family's social event. Robert's heroism had been deliberately buried to maintain social propriety and avoid uncomfortable questions about why Eleanor had been friends with a black boy. Rebecca made copies of every page of the inquest file. This documentation would be crucial for the exhibit she was already planning in her mind. An exhibit that would finally tell Robert's true story and honor the friendship between him and Eleanor that had defied the brutal racial codes of their time. But she needed more. She needed to hear from the other children who had been at that party, or at least from their descendants. Someone else must have seen what Eleanor saw. Someone else must remember. Rebecca created a list of the other children visible in the birthday party photograph. Using the Duchamp family papers and cross-referencing with 1910 census records, she identified 12 of the 15 children in the image. Most were children of other wealthy New Orleans families. The Beauregards, the Tremaines, the Lafites. Rebecca searched for their descendants, hoping to find family records, diaries, or oral histories that might mention the party or the drowning. Her first promising lead came from the Louisiana Historical Association. A librarian there mentioned that the Tremaine family papers had been donated to Tulane University's special collections in the 1970s. Rebecca visited Tulane's archives the next day. The Tremaine collection included the personal diary of Catherine Tremaine, who had been 9 years old in March 1911. Rebecca found entries about the party, and her heart raced as she read them. March 14th, 1911. Tomorrow is Eleanor Duchamp's birthday party. Mama says I must wear my new white dress and be on my very best behavior. She also said something strange. She said there might be a colored boy at the party, and I must not make any comment about it, as Mrs. Duchamp has allowed it as a special exception. I asked why a colored boy would be at our party, and Mama said, because Eleanor wanted it, and Mrs. Duchamp is too indulgent with her daughter. I don't understand why this is unusual. There are colored people everywhere. March 15th, 1911. The most horrible thing happened today. Eleanor's party was very nice at first. The garden was decorated beautifully, and there were cakes and sandwiches. Eleanor's friend Robert was there. He's the colored boy. Some of the other children whispered about him, but he seemed nice, and Eleanor was very happy he came. We were taking a photograph when little Henry Duchamp wandered away. I didn't notice at first. Then Robert shouted and ran toward the lake. I turned and saw Henry in the water splashing and crying. Robert jumped in even though he was wearing his good clothes. He pushed Henry toward the side where the groundskeeper pulled him out. But Robert couldn't get out. He went under the water and didn't come back up. Mr. Duchamp jumped in and pulled Robert out, but Robert was dead. Eleanor was screaming and screaming. Mrs. Duchamp took us all inside. Later, Mama came to get me and said I must never speak of what. She said it was a terrible accident and that Robert had fallen in the lake while playing. But that's not true. Robert saved Henry. He died saving Henry. I don't understand why Mama wants me to lie about it. March 18th, 1911. Mama found this diary and read what I wrote about Eleanor's party. She was very angry. She said I must never write such things. She said I must never tell anyone that a colored boy was a guest at the party or that Henry fell in the water. She said the truth would cause terrible scandal for the Duchamp family and reflect poorly on all of us who attended. She said if I ever speak of it, no decent family will let their children associate with me. I promised I wouldn't tell, but I will write this one last time so I don't forget. Robert Beaumont was brave. He saved Henry's life. He was a hero and no one will say it. That's not right. Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes. Catherine Tremaine had been 9 years old and had understood more clearly than any adult what had really happened and why the truth was being suppressed. She had tried to preserve the truth in her diary, only to be silenced by her mother. Rebecca continued searching and found 2 more accounts. The first was in a collection of oral histories recorded in the 1970s by a local history project. An elderly man named James Lafite, who had been 8 years old at Eleanor's party, had been interviewed about his childhood memories of New Orleans. Near the end of the interview, he mentioned the party. I remember Eleanor Duchamp's 10th birthday because something terrible happened. A boy drowned in the lake at her house. His name was Robert. He was colored, which was unusual. You didn't see colored children at parties like that. But Eleanor had insisted on inviting him. They were friends. When her little brother fell in the lake, Robert went in after him and saved him. But Robert drowned. I remember Eleanor crying and crying. The adults told us it was just an accident, that Robert had fallen in, but we all saw what happened. We knew the truth. We were told not to talk about it. The interviewer had asked, "Why do you think the adults wanted to hide what really happened?" James had replied, "Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that Eleanor had been friends with a colored boy, that she'd invited him as an equal to her party. That wasn't done in those days. And it would mean admitting that a colored child had died saving a white child's life. That would have raised uncomfortable questions about whose life mattered more, about gratitude and debt. Easier to just call it an accident and move on. But I never forgot Robert. He was braver than any of us." The third account came from an unexpected source. Rebecca found a letter in the Duchamp family papers, written in 1969 by Eleanor to her daughter Catherine. It had apparently been tucked into other documents and overlooked for decades. "My dear Catherine, I'm establishing the scholarship fund in Robert's name today. I should have done this years ago, but I think I needed to reach this age. 68, old enough to not care what others think, before I had the courage. Your grandfather would have been furious. He spent his entire life trying to erase Robert from family history, to pretend that day never happened the way it did, but I was there. I saw everything, and I have carried the weight of Robert's sacrifice for 58 years. Robert was my best friend. In a world that told us we couldn't be friends because of the color of his skin, we were friends anyway. My mother allowed it because she understood that friendship transcends the stupid, cruel rules society creates. On my 10th birthday, I insisted Robert be invited as a proper guest. My father was furious, but my mother supported me. Robert came, dressed in a borrowed suit, nervous but happy. We were taking a photograph when your Uncle Henry wandered toward the lake. Robert saw him fall in. Without hesitation, Robert ran and jumped in after him. Robert couldn't swim well, but he pushed Henry toward the edge where Mr. Walsh could reach him. Then Robert went under. By the time they pulled him out, he was gone. My father and the other adults made everyone lie about it. They said Robert had fallen in by accident. They erased his heroism to protect our family's reputation and to hide the fact that I had been friends with a black child. But I never forgot. I never stopped grieving. And I never stopped fighting for the world Robert deserved to live in, a world where children can be friends without society's barriers, where heroism is recognized regardless of skin color, where lives are valued equally. The scholarship is long overdue. It is the smallest recognition of the greatest act of courage I have ever witnessed. Rebecca sat in the archive reading room, overwhelmed by what she had uncovered. The full story was finally clear, and it was time to share it with the world. Rebecca knew she needed to contact the Duchamp family before moving forward with any public presentation of this story. Catherine Morrison, Eleanor's daughter, had donated the family papers, which meant she likely knew at least some of her mother's history. Rebecca found Catherine's contact information through the museum's donor records and called her that evening. A woman with a warm, cultured voice answered, "Ms. Morrison, this is Dr. Rebecca Torres from the Louisiana Heritage Museum. I'm calling about the photographs and documents you donated last month." "Oh yes, Dr. Torres. Have you found anything interesting?" Rebecca took a breath. "Ms. Morrison, I've discovered something extraordinary in your mother's papers. I found a photograph from her 10th birthday party in 1911, and through researching it, I've uncovered the story of a young boy named Robert Beaumont." There was a long pause. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Robert, yes. My mother spoke about him toward the end of her life. I'm surprised to hear there's a photograph." "There is, and it's remarkable. It captures the moment right before Robert saved your Uncle Henry's life. Ms. Morrison, I'd very much like to meet with you to discuss what I've learned and to ask your permission to tell Robert's story publicly." They arranged to meet 2 days later at Catherine's home in the Garden District. The house was a beautiful Victorian structure, carefully maintained, filled with antiques and family heirlooms. Catherine, an elegant woman in her 70s, welcomed Rebecca warmly. Over tea in the parlor, Rebecca shared everything she had discovered. The photograph, the newspaper articles, the inquest records, the children's accounts, and Eleanor's letter about establishing the scholarship. Catherine listened intently, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes. When Rebecca finished, Catherine stood and walked to a bookshelf, removing a leather-bound album. "My mother gave this to me a few years before she died," Catherine said. "She said I should understand the truth about our family, both the good and the shameful parts." The album contained photographs Rebecca had never seen. One showed Eleanor and Robert as young children, perhaps 5 and 3 years old, playing together in the Duchamp garden. Another showed them at around 7 and 5, sitting on a bench, Robert holding a book while Eleanor pointed at something on the page. "My mother saved these secretly," Catherine explained. My grandfather, Charles Duchamp, would have destroyed them if he'd known they existed. After Robert died, Grandfather forbade anyone from ever mentioning his name again. He removed every trace of Robert from the house, including photographs, but my grandmother Vivienne hid these few images, and my mother inherited them. Catherine showed Rebecca another photograph, this one showing Eleanor as a young woman in the 1920s, standing beside a gravestone. My mother visited Robert's grave every year on the anniversary of his death. She never missed a year, not in 78 years. She would place flowers and sit there for hours. My father knew, and he supported it, but she never told anyone else in the family where she was going. Rebecca felt the weight of Eleanor's lifelong grief and devotion. Your mother spent her life fighting for civil rights. Was that connected to Robert? Catherine nodded. Entirely. My mother said that Robert's death taught her two things. First, that the racial barriers society created were arbitrary and cruel. She and Robert had been true friends, proving that skin color meant nothing about who people were or how they could care for each other. Second, that heroism and worth had nothing to do with race. Robert had been braver and more selfless than any of the adults who later tried to erase his story. She devoted her life to fighting the kind of system that had made her friendship with Robert scandalous, and had denied him recognition for his sacrifice. Catherine paused, looking at the photograph of the birthday party that Rebecca had brought. My grandfather was ashamed of this picture, not because of the tragedy it represents, but because it showed Robert dressed as a guest, standing with white children. He thought it made the family look foolish. He kept it hidden away. When my mother inherited the family papers after grandfather died, she found it and kept it. But she said looking at it was too painful. That's why it ended up in the collection I donated. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it, but I couldn't display it either. What do you think your mother would want done with this story now? Rebecca asked gently. Catherine smiled, her eyes bright with tears. My mother would want everyone to know the truth. She would want Robert honored. She would want people to understand that an 8-year-old black boy was a hero, that he died saving a white child's life, and that his story was deliberately buried to protect racist social conventions. She spent her entire life fighting to dismantle those conventions. Telling Robert's story now would fulfill her life's work. Catherine gave Rebecca permission to mount an exhibit and to use all the family materials. She also shared something else, the location of Mary Beaumont's descendants. My mother tracked down Robert's family in the 1960s, Catherine explained. His mother Mary had 2 more children after Robert died. My mother quietly helped support them financially and maintained contact with the family. She said it was the least she could do. Mary had lost her son, saving our family's child. The family knows the true story. They deserve to be part of telling it publicly. Rebecca contacted the Beaumont family through the information Catherine provided. She spoke first with James Beaumont, Robert's great-nephew, who lived in New Orleans East. James was a retired teacher, 72 years old, and he remembered his grandmother Mary, Robert's younger sister born in 1915, talking about her brother. Grandma Mary was named after her mother, Robert's mother, James explained when Rebecca visited him at his home. She grew up hearing stories about the brother she never knew. Our great-grandmother, the original Mary, never really recovered from Robert's death. She became very religious, very quiet. She stayed working for the Duchamp family for several more years, but eventually she left and found other work. She died in 1935 when my grandmother was 20. James showed Rebecca a small wooden box that had belonged to his great-grandmother. Inside were a few precious items, a photograph of Robert at about age 6, a ribbon he had won for spelling at school, and a letter. The letter was dated March 20th, 1911, 5 days after Robert's death. It was addressed to Mary Beaumont from Vivienne Duchamp. Rebecca read it aloud with James's permission. Dear Mary, no words can express my sorrow for your loss and my gratitude for your son's bravery. Robert saved Henry's life. He did not fall into the lake by accident, as my husband has told others. He jumped in to save my son, and he succeeded, but at the cost of his own life. Robert was a remarkable child, intelligent, kind, and courageous beyond his years. Eleanor loved him dearly, and his death has broken her heart as surely as it has broken yours. I know my husband has forbidden me from speaking the truth publicly, and I am ashamed that I lack the strength to defy him. But I want you to know that I will never forget what Robert did, and I will never forget your sacrifice in losing him. I have placed $500 in an account in your name at the Citizens Bank. It is inadequate compensation for your loss, but I hope it will provide some security for your future. If you ever need anything, please come to me. Robert died a hero, and I will honor his memory in whatever ways I can. With deepest sorrow and gratitude, Vivienne Duchamp. James wiped his eyes. My great-grandmother kept that letter until she died. She never cashed the money. She said it felt like blood money, payment for her son's life. When she died, the account still had the $500 plus interest. My grandmother used it to pay for her younger siblings' education. She said that's what Robert would have wanted, for it to help children learn. Rebecca asked James what he knew about Robert himself. James pulled out the photograph of Robert and studied it lovingly. According to my grandmother, Robert was special. He learned to read at 4 years old. He memorized poems and recited them. He loved nature and would spend hours watching birds and insects in the garden. And he was kind. He shared everything he had, even when he had very little. My grandmother said that Robert and Eleanor Duchamp were genuinely close. Mrs. Vivian Duchamp had allowed it because she and our great-grandmother had been friends when they were young. She understood that children don't see color. They just see friends. The day of the party, James continued, Robert had been so excited. He'd never been to a birthday party before, at least not one with white children. Mrs. Duchamp had arranged for him to borrow a proper suit. He practiced his manners for days. Our great-grandmother was nervous about him going. She knew there could be trouble, but Robert had begged, and Eleanor had insisted, so she agreed. After he died, James said, his voice thick with emotion, my great-grandmother blamed herself for letting him go. She thought if she'd refused, he'd still be alive. But Mrs. Eleanor Duchamp, Eleanor Morrison by then, came to visit her in the 1960s and told her that Robert had died doing the most important thing anyone can do, saving another person's life. She said Robert had been a hero and that his death, while tragic, had meant something. That conversation helped my great-grandmother finally find some peace. James agreed to participate in any exhibit Rebecca created. He had other family members, cousins, nieces, nephews, who would want to be involved. The Beaumont family had preserved Robert's memory privately for over a century. They were ready to share his story with the world. Over the next 3 months, Rebecca worked intensively on creating an exhibit that would honor Robert's memory and tell the complete story of that March day in 1911. She titled it, Hidden in Plain Sight, The True Story Behind a Birthday Party Photograph. The exhibit was structured chronologically, taking visitors through the discovery process Rebecca herself had experienced. The entrance featured a large reproduction of the birthday party photograph with a simple question, what do you see? Visitors would first examine the photograph without additional information, noticing the children, the decorations, the formal garden setting. Only then would they be directed to look more closely at the boy in the corner, Robert Beaumont, and his expression of terror. The next section introduced Robert and Eleanor individually. Rebecca displayed the childhood photographs Catherine had provided, showing their friendship. Text panels explained the historical context. New Orleans in the early 1900s, the rigid racial segregation, the extraordinary nature of their friendship, and Vivian Duchamp's role in allowing and protecting it. The third section detailed the birthday party itself, Eleanor's insistence on inviting Robert, the borrowed suit, the other children's reactions, and the moment captured in the photograph. Rebecca used Catherine Tremaine's diary entries and other children's accounts to show that multiple witnesses had understood what was happening. The central gallery contained the most powerful elements. On one wall, Rebecca placed a timeline of March 15, 1911, showing minute by minute what had happened. Henry wandering toward the lake, Robert seeing him fall, Robert's decision to jump in despite being unable to swim well, his success in pushing Henry to safety, and his own drowning. Opposite this timeline, Rebecca displayed the official records, the dismissive newspaper article, the coroner's inquest with its deliberate erasure of truth, and Dr. Sullivan's note to Charles Duchamp about covering up the circumstances. The contrast was stark and damning. The truth versus the official lie. The children's honest accounts versus the adults' evasions. Robert's heroism versus the system that denied it. The next section focused on the aftermath. Mary Beaumont's grief, Eleanor's lifelong mourning, Vivian's secret support for Mary, and most significantly, Eleanor's adult life devoted to civil rights. Rebecca displayed newspaper clippings of Eleanor's activism, her work with the NAACP in the 1950s, her participation in voter registration drives in the 1960s, her support for school integration efforts. She included Eleanor's own words from various interviews and speeches, showing how she had explicitly connected her activism to Robert's memory. I learned at age 10 that heroism has no color, that friendship recognizes no artificial barriers, and that systems which divide people by race are not just unjust, but obscene. A black child saved my white brother's life and died doing it, and the white adults around me tried to pretend it hadn't happened that way. That taught me everything I needed to know about which side of history I wanted to be on. The penultimate section honored Robert specifically. Rebecca created a portrait wall with his photograph at the center, surrounded by information about his short life, his intelligence, his kindness, his love of learning, his friendship with Eleanor. She included the ribbon he'd won for spelling, quotes from his teacher's records describing him as exceptional and promising, and testimonies from the Beaumont family about what he had meant to them. Most powerfully, she included a display about the Robert Beaumont Scholarship Fund at Xavier University, showing how Eleanor had ensured his name would be remembered and honored. Rebecca had contacted scholarship recipients, and several had contributed statements about what receiving the scholarship meant to them. One wrote, "Learning that this scholarship was named for an 8-year-old boy who died a hero in 1911 changed my understanding of history. Robert Beaumont should be celebrated alongside any adult hero. His age didn't diminish his courage. I carry his name with pride." The final room of the exhibit was designed as a reflection space. Rebecca placed benches facing a large illuminated reproduction of the birthday party photograph. Beside it, she placed an equally large photograph, one of the images Eleanor had secretly preserved, showing her and Robert playing together in the garden, both smiling, both clearly happy. The juxtaposition was intentional. Joy and tragedy, friendship and loss, truth and erasure. A guest book invited visitors to share their thoughts. Rebecca also created an interactive digital component. Visitors could access a tablet that showed all the research materials, the full newspaper articles, the complete inquest transcripts, Eleanor's letter to Catherine, the children's diary entries and oral histories. This allowed deeper engagement for those who wanted to understand every detail of the investigation. The museum's education department developed curriculum materials for school groups, focusing on themes of heroism, friendship across racial lines, the distortion of historical truth, and the long-term impacts of segregation. Before the exhibit opened, Rebecca organized a private preview for the Beaumont and Morrison families. Over 30 people attended, representing 4 generations. They walked through the exhibit together, many crying, all visibly moved. James Beaumont stood before Robert's portrait for a long time. Finally, he said, "For over a century, my family has told Robert's story privately, in our homes, to our children. We've kept his memory alive, but we always knew the world didn't know the truth. Today, that changes. Today, Robert gets the recognition he deserved in 1911. Thank you for making this happen." Catherine Morrison embraced James, 2 descendants of families connected by tragedy and heroism, now united in honoring that shared history. The exhibit opened on March 15, 2024, exactly 113 years after Robert's death. The museum had planned for a modest opening, but word had spread through social media and local news coverage. Over 500 people attended the opening ceremony. Rebecca had invited several speakers. James Beaumont spoke about Robert's legacy and his family and the importance of truth-telling. Catherine Morrison read her mother's letter about establishing the scholarship. A Xavier University dean spoke about the scholarship's impact over 55 years. Most powerfully, Dr. Angela Freeman, a civil rights historian from Tulane University, placed Robert's story in broader context. What happened to Robert Beaumont in 1911 is a microcosm of a much larger American story. The story of Black heroism deliberately erased, Black humanity systematically denied, Black contributions purposely forgotten. Robert saved a white child's life, and the white power structure couldn't acknowledge it because doing so would require acknowledging his full humanity, his equality, his worth. Easier to call it an accident and move on. But here's what they couldn't erase. Eleanor Duchamp's memory. A 10-year-old white girl who had loved her Black friend refused to forget him. She refused to accept the lie. And she spent her entire life fighting the system that had killed him and tried to erase him. That's the power of genuine human connection. It survives even the most determined efforts to destroy it. This exhibit matters because it recovers a story that was deliberately buried. It matters because it shows that even in the darkest periods of American racial history, there were people who refused to accept injustice, including a Black child who gave his life to save another, and a white woman who spent her life honoring that sacrifice and fighting for the world he deserved to live in. Robert Beaumont should be remembered as a hero. Eleanor Morrison should be remembered as a lifelong warrior for justice, and we should remember that the same systems that tried to erase Robert's story in 1911 are still working to erase Black stories today. This exhibit is an act of resistance against that erasure. The audience stood and applauded for several minutes. In the weeks that followed, the exhibit drew unprecedented crowds. Local schools brought students. The story was covered by national media outlets. Social media posts about the exhibit went viral, with many people sharing their own family stories of forgotten heroes or deliberately suppressed histories. Rebecca received hundreds of emails from visitors. Many shared similar stories, discovering truths about their own families that had been hidden or distorted, finding evidence of relationships that crossed racial lines in times when such relationships were forbidden, uncovering heroism that had been deliberately erased. One particularly moving message came from a teacher in Mississippi. "I brought my 8th grade class to see this exhibit. We drove 5 hours. It was worth it." My students, Black and white, were profoundly affected by Robert's story. Several students asked why they'd never learned about him in school. That led to a powerful discussion about whose stories get told and whose get erased and why. One of my Black students said, "Robert was 8 years old and he was already a better man than most adults." I think that's the perfect summary. Thank you for recovering this story. The exhibit also sparked academic interest. Several historians began researching similar cases, instances of interracial friendship in the Jim Crow South, examples of Black heroism that had been officially denied or minimized, and the long-term psychological and social impacts of such erasure. 3 months after the opening, Rebecca received an unexpected call from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. They wanted to fund an expanded version of the exhibit as a traveling installation that could visit museums across the country, particularly in the South, where similar stories remained buried in local archives. Rebecca agreed immediately, working with the Beaumont and Morrison families to create a version of the exhibit that could tour. Over the next 2 years, Hidden in Plain Sight would visit 15 cities, reaching hundreds of thousands of visitors. But perhaps the most significant response came from a small ceremony in May 2024. The New Orleans City Council passed a resolution officially recognizing Robert Beaumont as a hero and apologizing for the city's failure to honor him in 1911. A historical marker was placed at the former location of the Duchamp Mansion, now a residential complex, commemorating Robert's sacrifice. At the dedication ceremony, James Beaumont unveiled a small bronze plaque that read, "On this site, March 15, 1911, Robert Beaumont, age 8, gave his life to save another child from drowning. His heroism was deliberately erased from history because of his race. He is remembered now, and always as a hero and as a reminder of the countless Black Americans whose stories were suppressed but whose humanity and courage can never be diminished. May his memory inspire us to see and honor the heroism around us, regardless of who performs it. 2 years after the exhibit opened, Rebecca stood in Lafayette Cemetery No. 2 on a warm March morning. She was not alone. Around her stood more than 100 people, members of the Beaumont family, descendants of Eleanor Morrison, students from local schools, community members, and several of the children who had received the Robert Beaumont Scholarship over the years. They had gathered for the dedication of a new monument at Robert's grave. The original modest marker had been replaced with a larger granite stone, funded by donations from exhibit visitors and community members. The new monument featured a bronze relief portrait of Robert based on his childhood photograph and an inscription: Robert Beaumont, March 7th, 1903, March 15th, 1911, son, friend, hero. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Robert died, saving another child's life. Though his heroism was deliberately hidden for over a century because of his race, his courage shines through time. He lived 8 years and taught us how to be brave, how to be selfless, and how to love without barriers. His legacy continues through the countless lives changed by his example and by the scholarship established in his name. May all who pass here remember, heroism knows no color, childhood no lesser than adulthood, and love stronger than the systems that seek to divide us. Rebecca watched as James Beaumont and Catherine Morrison together unveiled the monument. Both were crying. So was Rebecca. So were many others gathered there. A children's choir from a local school sang Amazing Grace. A representative from Xavier University spoke about the scholarship's impact, announcing that the endowment had been expanded with recent donations, ensuring it would continue in perpetuity. Then James Beaumont spoke, his voice strong despite his tears. My great-great-uncle Robert has been gone for 113 years. For 101 of those years, his true story was known only to our family and to Eleanor Morrison, who never forgot him. But 2 years ago, Dr. Rebecca Torres found a photograph and asked questions. She refused to accept the official story. She dug deeper, and because of her work, Robert's story has been told to hundreds of thousands of people. His name has been honored. His heroism has been recognized. And his example has inspired people across the country. Robert was 8 years old. He couldn't have known his name would be forgotten. He couldn't have known that the adults around him would erase his sacrifice to protect their own reputations. He just saw a child drowning and knew he had to help. That's what heroes do. They act without thinking about recognition or reward. They act because it's right. Eleanor Morrison understood that. She carried Robert's memory for 78 years. She built her life's work on the foundation of their friendship and his sacrifice. She made sure his name would live on through the scholarship. And now, thanks to Dr. Torres and all the people who have embraced Robert's story, he will never be forgotten again. To everyone here today, remember Robert. Tell your children about him. Tell your students. Tell anyone who will listen. Tell them that an 8-year-old black boy in 1911 was brave enough to give his life for a friend. Tell them that his story was buried but not destroyed. Tell them that truth eventually wins, even when it takes a century. And tell them that every person, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of social position, has the capacity for extraordinary courage and love. As the ceremony concluded, visitors approached the monument one by one, many placing flowers or small stones on the grave in the Jewish tradition of memorial. Children who had attended with school groups left drawings and notes. One note from a 7-year-old girl simply said, "Thank you, Robert, for being brave. I will try to be brave like you." Rebecca stayed after most others had left, standing with Catherine Morrison in the shade of an old oak tree. "My mother would have loved this day," Catherine said quietly. She carried such guilt for so many years, guilt that Robert died saving her brother, guilt that her family had tried to erase his story, guilt that she hadn't fought harder to tell the truth when she was younger. But toward the end of her life, she found peace. She knew she'd honored Robert in the ways she could. She knew the scholarship would keep his name alive. I think she'd be astonished and grateful to see this, to see so many people gathered to honor a little boy she loved more than a century ago. Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought them here, from finding a photograph in a donation box to this moment of public recognition and remembrance. It had been the most meaningful work of her career, proving that historians don't just study the past. Sometimes they rescue it, recover it, and restore it to its rightful place. There are more stories like Robert's, Rebecca said. More photographs hiding truths, more archives containing buried histories, more families carrying memories that the official record has erased. Catherine nodded. Then I hope you'll keep looking. I hope others will too. Every Robert Beaumont whose story was suppressed deserves to be remembered. Every friendship like his and my mother's that defied unjust social rules deserves to be celebrated. Every act of heroism that was denied recognition deserves to be honored. As Rebecca left the cemetery that day, she thought about the photograph that had started everything, a birthday party scene that had seemed ordinary until she looked more closely at the child in the corner. That closer look had revealed a story of friendship, heroism, tragedy, and erasure. But it had also revealed something more. The resilience of truth, the enduring power of love, and the way that even the most deliberately buried stories can be brought back to light. Robert Beaumont had lived only 8 years, but his story would now live forever. The photograph that had captured his last moment of life had become the tool of his redemption, the proof of his heroism, and the foundation of his legacy. In an archive room somewhere, Rebecca knew another photograph was waiting. Another story was hidden, another truth was ready to be discovered, and she would keep looking, keep questioning, keep digging deeper. Because that's what historians do, not just preserve the past, but reclaim it, restore it, and ensure that the forgotten are finally remembered. Robert's story was no longer hidden, and thanks to the power of a single photograph examined closely, it never would be again.